So let's move on now to fixed costs. So we just went over variable costs, the taxes and benefits and the salary. Now we're getting into fixed costs. Now these are, or overhead, synonymous term, you'll want, these are the things that are not directly related to the services being delivered, but they keep the business going. And you're usually not going to be able to invoice these to your client. So it's almost like non-billable items. And you can think like office equipment, rent and mortgage, marketing, technology, business insurances. So this gets you in business just to play the game and to be a consultant. And we actually have a really comprehensive list of all of these overhead expenses. And it's good to just kind of go down the list and make sure, oh, I didn't consider that, because you want to factor those items into what the fixed costs are going to be, so you don't have an unexpected fixed cost show up while you've been working and you don't have the opportunity to renegotiate your rate. All right, let's go over utilization. Utilization is a really important concept to grasp, and it can be a little confusing. So let me kind of walk through what this is. Utilization is defined as a percentage of hours you spend doing actual billable work, not non-billable work, billable work. Now, typically large consulting firms target a utilization rate of like 70 to 80%. And then that remaining percentage is usually used for business development, administration, and just kind of time that people take off. Now, if you're new to consulting, you probably want to start off using the standard hours. Now, it's good to start with a standard. So standard is 40 hours per week and 52 weeks a year, giving you 2080 per year. And here's the thing. You may not work all of those hours, or maybe you'll even work more than the 2080, but it's about how many will be billable hours and hours that you'll actually invoice the client. So you start with that 2080 and you start to back down from that number. And you back down from it by considering factors like, how many hours do you think you're going to spend on business development? This is stuff like marketing, getting your website up, going to a networking event, doing a speaking engagement, going to a dinner, a meeting with a friend to talk about business. It's just getting your name, your reputation, letting people know that you're a consultant and you're open to doing work. The next thing is administrative responsibilities, and these are things like how much time will you spend creating an invoice, tracking it when you send it to the client, figuring out all of your taxes, or going out to find a CPA to figure out your taxes for you, working on regulatory issues that might come up. So these are just, again, non-billable items. And there's also training. So, every consultant wants to keep their skills really sharp. So, this is getting your credits, going to conferences, seminars, or classes that you might attend. So add those hours in, deduct those hours as well. And then finally, just take off for time that you want to take off, kind of that personal time. So, just as a real quick example, if you were to say, start with a number 2080, total amount of the year, and you added up all those things that I just went through, and let's say that was a total of 500 hours for the year. Now, your total available billable hours that are potential are 1580. So your utilization rate would be that divisible, which is 76%. So that means that on average, you would be able to bill 76% of the time you spend working, or in other words, 24% of the time is pure cost that your bill rate needs to cover. All right. Now let's go through a nice little graph that talks and kind of pulls all of these concepts together. The first are dollars, and those are there on the left. And then you have the amount of hours that you have on your x-axis. And then you have your fixed costs, or your overhead costs. Then you have your variable costs, which, again, remember, is your labor, your taxes, your benefits, and it's variable. So it's going, the accumulation of dollars that you spend towards that variable cost increases as you bill more hours. So that line goes up. Then you have your total cost, which is adding your fixed cost plus your variable costs, which again, over time is increasing. Now here's the really neat thing, is your markup. Your markup is the factor used to offset the risk and hopefully generate yourself a reasonable profit. I mean, you don't want to work for free. So, and the thing is with your markup is that it's based primarily on risk. And, you know, your risk is based on the reality that you may not be able to bill all the hours that you plan to, or maybe you'll incur some unexpected cost along the way, or maybe, you know, the client increases the scope and you know, and doesn't want to pay for it, or there's just unexpected things. Now, if you're not sure how much you should use as a markup, general rule of thumb, you should go with 20 to 30%. But if you're kind of moving in the dark a little bit, you don't know much about the client, it's maybe the first time working with them, there's a lot of unknowns, then that means that there's increased risk. And if there's increased risk, then you probably want to go with a higher markup. So maybe going with 30 to 50%. So the key thing here is that the higher the potential risk, the higher the markup should be. And then you have your billings, and your billings are kind of the accumulated amount of dollars that you're sending off to your client via invoice. And then the next point is your break-even point, which is the total amount that you've invoiced to your clients in dollars, and that begins at a certain point, that begins to exceed the total cost, again in dollars, that you have spent. And once you hit this point, then you're in the green. You know, you're making a profit. So obviously, the more green, the better for you. So that's kind of how it works. So that's yeah, that's everything that I wanted to go through. Hopefully, that's a good summary to all the points in calculating your true cost.
So Steve, this kind of takes me back too many years. It reminds me when I was in the Wharton Business School. So
yeah, that's right, economics class.
You brought back many memories for me, but I'm sure there's lots of questions out there, and you know, we've got a couple of hands raised, so keep them raised, and we're going to get to them. But before we do, I definitely want to hear from Gary, and Gary will tell us a few words about himself, and we have some questions for Gary. But Gary, please give everyone a little bit of perspective in terms of why you decided to become an independent consultant, and you know, what's the process you went through, and you know, did you do any of this economic mumbo jumbo here, or did you just kind of throw a dart in the wall and figure out where your bill rate should be? So I wanted you give us a little bit of a perspective.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks for the opportunity, and that was fascinating discussion. I didn't go to the Wharton Business School. I went to the finest public education the state of Oklahoma could provide, so you can understand that I had a problem with that graph. But just a little bit of perspective on my background, because it probably won't match very many, but at least it'll give people my perspective. I retired after, Gene said, after 30-something years working civil service for the U.S. Air Force. Working logistics and acquisition issues, and I retired in 1st of May last year. Prior to my retiring, I have a previous 4-star boss of mine who was very successful in consulting, and I had talked to him on occasions, and he encouraged me that that might be a possibility for me as well. And prior to my retirement, once it was announced, I was contacted by several DoD contractors. I wasn't able to pursue those discussions because of ethics laws until my retirement. But I figured that I would probably get a chance to have some opportunities doing that. And here's some of the thought process I went through. First of all, I had been involved in acquisitions, so I knew that people knew that I had expertise in terms of government requirements and how that process works. And obviously, there's a lot of money involved in that, and there are many DoD contractors that are anxious to have that insight that I might be able to provide for their pursuit of government work. Second, I knew that the government, with the budget issues, was going to have a significant drawdown of personnel, both military and civil service. And so when you have those drawdowns, you don't lose the newest folks, you lose the experienced personnel, and they were going to need help during that transition. The third thing was I didn't want to relocate. We like it here in San Antonio. The Riverwalk's nice, the weather's nice. I'm a golfer and I can golf year round, and didn't really want to relocate for a job. And the fourth thing is that I do have a government pension, so it gave me a baseline and a foundation and allowed for some patience and for growth of the company. So that's sort of how I got to the decision to then, once I retired, then I started getting some calls, and one of the first companies that called me through a colleague and asked if I'd be interested in doing some consulting work, and they said, now Gary, independent consultants, we require them to use MBO partners. And so that's how I got connected with MBO, and they use MBO to pay their independent consultants, and that was a big help for me for understanding how to work in this environment. I'll just comment a little bit about my thoughts on rates and how I got to the rate. I didn't go through the calculation that Steve said, because basically what I did is I discussed with some of my colleagues. I asked about their experience, and basically it was a market-driven thing. What does the market pay for someone with my rank and experience? What advice could I get from them? What insight did they have? And they made some range estimates to me. And so that gave me an idea, and then the company was a large company and going after large contracts, and so that allowed me to set a rate with them. The next thing that came along was I had a couple of companies that wanted to hire me on retainer. Well, what I considered there was not so much they said, we'll give you a certain amount of money if you guarantee us a certain amount of hours every month. Whether I work them or not, they're putting me on retainer, and so I figured that I could afford to have a smaller rate, because in actuality I probably wouldn't be working the full amount that I was guaranteeing them as needed. And that's the way it's worked out. I have these retainers and I work for them and I'm very responsive to them, but if there's not requirements, then I'm not necessarily, I may be doing research or something, but it's not something that I would be necessarily billing them if I was billing on an hourly basis.